Thank you, Adriana. As Adriana mentioned, the comprehensive search for relevant clinical practice guidelines led to the nominated guideline Stroke Rehabilitation, Long-Term Rehabilitation After Stroke, published in June of 2013 by the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. The agreed-to tool was used to evaluate the overall methodological rigour and quality of this guideline, and to determine whether its recommendations regarding dysphagia care following a stroke should be implemented into clinical practice. The tool examines 6 key areas, or domains, when rating a guideline. The first domain, scope and purpose, requests that the aim of the guideline, the health questions, and the target population are made clear to users. The aims of this guideline are clearly stated within the introduction. The 22 health or review questions used to guide the Guideline Development Group's literature search are written in full, and the target population is clearly described also. In terms of Domain 2, stakeholder involvement, the members of the Guideline Development Group, or GDG, were listed within the guideline, mostly in adequate detail, and consist of individuals from a number of relevant professional groups. It is stated a number of times that the GDG sought to incorporate the views and preferences of the target population. However, it is not always clear how these opinions were sought and how they influenced final recommendations. It is made clear that the guideline is intended for use by professionals involved in stroke rehabilitative care, aiming to inform their clinical decision-making regarding intervention. However, specific health disciplines are not suggested. Domain 3, rigour of development, is described inconsistently. Methods of searching for relevant evidence were well outlined in the unattached appendices, and the search strategy was appropriate to the review questions and could easily be replicated. Criteria for including and excluding evidence and methods for evaluating the strengths and limitations of evidence were mostly well outlined and appropriate. However, rationale for selection criteria was not always thoroughly explained. The process for formulating recommendations is described, justified, and is appropriate, yet this information is segmented and placed in different areas throughout the guideline rather than altogether. It is clear that the GDG considered both benefits and potential harm of interventions when formulating recommendations. Most recommendations are congruent with the included supporting evidence. However, some appear to be less well substantiated. The guideline was externally reviewed prior to publication. However, it is very unclear as to whether the reviewers were external to the GDG or not. Also unclear is the recommended timeframe and procedure for updating this guideline. Domain 4 looks at clarity of presentation. Key recommendations are easily identifiable within the guideline. However, they are not always entirely specific and unambiguous, with readers often redirected to previously developed guidelines for full, in-depth recommendations. The discussion of applicability of this guideline, as examined in Domain 5, is this guideline's greatest weakness. Facilitators and barriers to application of recommendations are not discussed, and it will be very difficult for users to know how to best implement recommendations based upon the very limited advice provided. Strategies for monitoring the use and impact of recommendations are also absent. The GDG did, however, conduct a literature review to evaluate the potential resource implications of implementing recommendations, specifically economic costs, and discuss their findings in detail. Finally, Domain 6 examined editorial independence. While competing interests of the GDG members were declared appropriately, it is not explicitly stated that the funding body did not have any influence over the guideline's content. Users can therefore not be assured of full editorial independence. Overall, this guideline could be recommended for use with some modifications. Improvements should focus upon including tools and advice for implementation so that recommendations can be applied to clinical settings. Further information regarding ongoing monitoring of recommendations and guideline updating procedures would be beneficial also. The GDG did conduct a comprehensive literature search to evaluate interventions following stroke and develop their own recommendations accordingly. As a result, they produced evidence-based recommendations pertaining to dysphagia care following stroke. I'll now hand over to Becca, who will present one of these recommendations in detail. Thank you.